Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone that the land that this presentation was filmed on is the traditional, unceded, and still occupied territory of the Syilx Okanagan people. For over 11,000 years, at the very least, Kelowna and the entirety of the Okanagan has been the traditional Syilx nation. Unceded means that the land was never given over by treaty or anything like that. And when I say it's still occupied, that's to remind everyone that the Syilx are a nation who are still alive and well.
Hi everyone, my name is Laura Chen. I am a teacher candidate from UBC Okanagan, and we are here at Laurel Packinghouse today. I'm so excited to learn about the history of Okanagan Orchard. And the gentleman standing next to me is Marshall. He is a well-experienced educational assistant that works for Kelowna Museums. With his vast knowledge and deep understanding of the Okanagan orchards, he is going to share with us some fascinating insights into this topic.
Well, nowadays, the Laurel Packinghouse is the home to the Okanagan Wine and Orchard Museum, as well as being a popular event space for the city of Kelowna. However, beginning in 1918 and running all the way into the 1970s, this space was actually a packing house where fruit, mostly apples, was processed here, coming from our local orchards, and being packed into fruit boxes and shipped off across Canada and mostly across the British Empire in the early days. A man named Father Pandozzi and his crew coming into the valley with the specific purpose of Catholicizing the indigenous population. Well, they brought along with them some fruit seeds, planted them. They weren't the large industrial orchards that we know today. They were smaller, more personal. However, they were the beginnings of the orcharding industry as we knew it. The Okanagan has a reputation as the orchard city, the garden city, a place where historically, it was advertised you could just throw down your seeds and watch your orchard grow before you. Was that true? Not entirely. But it did work. It got people to come out and start their own ranches, fruit ranches. Land that had previously been used for cattle was irrigated and subdivided and then sold as land for orcharding and fruit ranching. So, we get that start with a lot of men coming in, particularly from England. Well, a lot of those men were now here with a plot of land that was perfect for growing fruit, and with enough money to hire, generally, indigenous workers who were intimately familiar with the land and the orcharding process already, went on to start their own orchards, many of which ended up being quite successful. Well, it may be easy to think that fruits like apples, peaches, apricots all grow here naturally since they do so well in our fertile, rich soil. However, that's not true. Things like apples, cherries, plums, they were all brought here from somewhere else. Usually around the mid to late 19th century, fruits were brought in, however, they weren't native to the area. For thousands of years, however, the indigenous Syilx people, who have lived here for at least 11,000 years, with upper estimates placing them at 40,000 years of civilization in this area, have for thousands of years intentionally planted Saskatoon berries in small orchards. Small orchards with Saskatoon berries, or siya in Insilxian, the Syilx language, were planted intentionally and harvested because each family needed about 100 pounds dried up to survive through the winter, but also because with just a little bit of training, the branches will grow incredibly straight and make wonderful shafts for arrows. A very important plant that grows completely naturally here in the Okanagan. Another plant that grows very naturally here in the Okanagan that you might have seen before are these sumac berries.
Can I touch them?
Yeah, of course. Give them a sniff. They smell really nice.
They have this beautiful, sweet herbal smell.
Almost citrusy, yeah.
I'm quite curious about the irrigation system for the orchards. Since Okanagan have this dry, desert-like climates, where and how do the farmers get water for their orchards?
Large flumes, almost water slides, were constructed historically out of things like this metal here, even wood in the past. And these large water slide type flumes would go all the way from the tops of the mountains down into the farms. You can see here an example of a water trough, and this would be the final destination for that water.
I'm wondering, there's probably salmon and other creatures living in the creek, and how is that impacting their life?
The salmon particularly have been affected very hard by the changing of the region. Mission Creek in particular used to be slow and winding, which is exactly the kind of water that salmon love. However, it's not very good for building houses and golf courses. So over the years, Mission Creek has been transformed to be very fast and very, very, very straight, which is bad for salmon, as well as just trends of global warming causing an increase in the water temperature that salmon don't like. The indigenous diet for thousands of years of the Syilx people was 85% salmon. And so losing that has been a huge loss, not just for the indigenous population, but also just for the region in general.
What are some challenges that orchard farmers face, and how have these challenges been addressed over time in terms of pests and diseases?
Well, actually, the Okanagan is unique in that we're the only region that has apple orchards that has not yet been affected by the apple maggot. So we're quite lucky in that regard. However, the codling moth is one invasive pest species, and another would be birds and other bugs, such as starlings. Now, we deal with those in the same manner that you would typically deal with pests, things like pesticides, fungicides, things of that nature. However, there is an ongoing demand for organic grown fruits grown without those pesticides. Dora, thank you for putting on the apple picking bag so I can demonstrate how it works. As you can see, these apple picking bags, which have been worn for about 100 years, are still used today in orchards.
They're fairly big, and I wonder why it's hollow and it doesn't have a bottom.
Well, that's because simply dropping the fruit through will cause it to fall out. These little drawstrings on the side
There's drawstrings.
hook into hooks on the side here and here, and allow fruit to be collected inside this bag. When the bag is filled, you can lift up the drawstrings and allow the apples to fall out.
The orchard industry shaped Florida as a community, and what role does it play in the development of the city?
I think it's impossible to separate the history of Kelowna from the history of our orcharding. We've gone as far as becoming known colloquially as the Orchard City, turning this desert landscape into a veritable gem of the country. Well, how do you do that? It's through the use of water, certainly, and it's through littering our landscape with orchards and vineyards, which has allowed in tandem to grow with the budding and now fairly successful wine industry here in the Okanagan. Allowing for that, we create an environment that allows for tourism and grows the economy in a way that goes hand in hand with the orcharding industry.